And welcome back into another edition of the Fantasy Authority podcast. We are back again with another edition of the show. This week we are going to be covering wide receivers from this upcoming 2020 rookie class. This week I'm joined, as always, by my co-host Cody Kutzer. You can find him on Twitter at @CKutzerFF, and you can find me on Twitter at FantasyWrath13. Again, my name is Kevin Steele, and we are joined this week by another special guest. We are really excited to talk wide receivers with him. His name is Jesse Reeves. You can find him on Twitter at JesseReevesFF. He's also a senior writer at Roto Underworld and also does a new podcast that is some really good stuff. You guys should go check that out. It's called The Draft Dialogue, and they are crushing it over there. How you doing tonight, Jesse?
I'm doing good. How are you guys?
Awesome, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
Yeah, man, for sure. You've been pimping the podcast world, man. I've been seeing you everywhere. Really enjoyed the one you did on Breakout Age. That was a really good listen.
Oh, I appreciate that, man. Yeah, these are metrics and data that I've been using for the better part of about a year and a half now, almost 2 years, dude. And I'm excited to share it any chance that I can. I definitely love talking about it. I probably talk about it too much. People think I'm probably crazy with all the numbers and stuff, but I definitely enjoy talking about it. So I'm excited that you guys were able to reach out and get me on here so we can talk a little bit.
Dude, the one question I had for you before we got going is because you also grind the tape as well as the numbers. So what came first? Was football there first and the numbers came, or were you always in the number, vice versa? How did that come about?
Yeah, so I would honestly say my background is watching football. I have a little bit of a coaching experience at one of my local high schools here in California, a DB's coach. So I definitely learned kind of the ins and outs of defense and a little bit of nuance in terms of defensive scheme and coverages and stuff like that. So I would definitely say that my background and what came first was just kind of a love for actual on-field football, and then watching it and kind of watching players and kind of digesting what's on tape and stuff. And then the numbers kind of followed after that. I was I was introduced by proxy to Peter Howard, somebody that I look up to very, very much in this industry, as does everybody. And just an overall insanely smart man that makes you question your process. And when I got in contact with him, I believe we worked a little bit over at FF Statistics, and he just introduced me to a lot of these age-adjusted numbers, age-adjusted market share, and breakout age, and things of that nature. And I kind of just latched onto it. It's a very concrete process when we're looking at the way we evaluate these prospects coming in from college to the NFL. And it was something that I really, really loved crunching the numbers on and just learning about and digesting. So although I do have a film background with kind of on-field experience and stuff, I definitely gravitated towards the numbers once I got there.
I mean, according to Twitter, I don't think that's allowed, but I guess you're doing it anyway.
Hey, you can do anything you want. It's probably smarter if you're using both. Honestly, that's just my opinion. If you have that kind of puts you in a little bit of a bucket that you can have experience in both. I definitely believe in the numbers probably more than I do myself. I trust my own eyes, so I trust what I see. But I understand that you can't ask everyone to trust what you see. So I believe the numbers and the data are very, very good representations of things that have happened, while film tells you why they happen. My why might be completely different than somebody else's. So I always like to use the numbers and the data as a foundation point for what did happen, because that's something we can't change. It's very easy to lie with numbers, but it's very hard to tell the story without them. Is kind of how I go about that.
Yeah, man, that makes a lot of sense. Like if me and you could sit there and watch the same exact play and come away with two completely different opinions on what happened and what we saw. So I definitely get why a lot of people lean toward numbers, because, like you said, they are what they are. I mean, you can't really argue with the numbers and stats and metrics that are there in front of you. You can question, I guess, the process, but at the end of the day, the numbers are the numbers.
Yeah,
exactly.
But also, I agree with that too, but I also think that on the other side of it, I think being able to actually watch and grind through some, it gives you a little bit more context of also what's happening versus just simply looking at the numbers as well. So I think that marrying the two together, I think is definitely the way to go. But it doesn't seem like that's the norm. It seems like most people are either team analytics or team grind the tape.
Yeah, they are. And the hard part about that is you look at it as kind of a I'm trying to come up with a good analogy, but I don't want to butcher it because I probably don't have one. I'm not good at that. But I look at I look at film as kind of a color wheel, and then I look at data as black and white, and then I look at where can I add that color that I'm trying to paint the most clear picture possible. So that's kind of the way that I look at it, and it's hard to get away from that. You can add context to data, but at its overall root, the number is what the number is, and it is what it tells us. It's what happened for the most part. But if you're willing and you're interested enough in adding a little bit of color to that mix, then you definitely want to be able to grind some film and be able to, at the very least, you don't have to be a scheme master. I mean, I know guys that are far better at digesting schemes and play-by-plays than I ever will be. But I do have a really, really good sense for individual traits that I look for in prospects, things that I like running backs, tight ends, quarterbacks, and wide receivers to have overall. And generally, I think if you're looking and you're really interested in kind of setting yourself apart and being the best kind of evaluator that you can be, I would definitely suggest learning at the very basics, individual traits for position-specific players and stuff. So,
no, I totally agree. So, yeah, I think that's some really good stuff. I think it's some good background on kind of why you are who you are and how you got to where you are. So, why don't we go ahead and since we got a few of these players to get through, why don't we go ahead and jump into the class here, this upcoming rookie class. I feel like that this is kind of the crown jewel of this class, where I feel like that every year there's kind of that one position that kind of stands out above the rest, and I feel like this wide receiver class might be that. It is super. I think at the top you have some elite options, and then from there I think there's a lot of depth in this class. But I think today we're going to try to talk about necessarily may not be our individual top 12 wide receivers, but more so just kind of I think the more consistent top 12 guys right now in this class. And then with this being pre-combine, so we don't have all the numbers right now. We don't have kind of the stuff that we kind of look forward to be able to build off some of these guys. But right now, I think we can at least take a look at a few things into this class and kind of take a look at it. So I think first things first, I think, the most obvious is, I think in this class, I think for everybody, for the most part, is either, CD Lamb and Jerry Jeudy as the top two guys in this class. Who are you? Are you team Lamb or team Jeudy heading into this so far right now?
For me, I'm
definitely. Oh, sorry.
No, man, go ahead.
Oh, I was gonna say I'm definitely Team Lamb. I'm there. I think he has a really good ascending profile when we look at the numbers, and he's absolutely physically dominant. He's a guy that I really I really enjoy watching. He's a guy that I really enjoy studying in terms of data. So he's in my tier 1 for sure, solidified absolutely. And I think when we factor in a little bit of draft capital there as well, he's going to be a guy that you're definitely going to want to spend those early firsts on in fantasy.
Yeah, I have Lamb 1 as well. I just think as polished and refined as Jeudy is, and don't get me wrong, I think we're kind of splitting hairs here a little bit, and I think the hate on Jeudy has gone a little too far. He was the wide receiver 1 for at least a season and a half, and then all of a sudden we get to this point every year in the off season, and it's now all of a sudden it's somebody else. And Jeudy, not only is he not 1 or 2, he's down like 5 now. It's what we do every single year. But for me, Lamb just I think he has a little bit more room to grow. I think his upside is a little bit higher because he's not as refined and nuanced of a route runner as Jeudy is. I think what we're looking at Jeudy, like that's what he's going to be, and that's still a really good prospect. But if I'm picking one, I'm going Lamb over Jeudy. But if I end up with Jeudy and 4 or 5 in my dynasties, I'm not gonna be crying any rivers, that's for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I guess with Judy, you kind of look at him, and you're right. It feels like that all of a sudden now you're seeing people put him at like 6, 7, 8 in their rankings and all this, and I'm like, where did this come from? Why did this all of a sudden start happening with him? Where I think over the last year, like he has kind of been a consistent guy, and then all of a sudden, I think people do it sometimes just to get cute and to be contrarian, and this feels like a spot where there's really no point in being contrarian with this take. I know there are some concerns with his profile, but especially I guess most notably, I guess would be his BMI that I think people are most concerned with. Is that something that you're concerned with at all?
If we're talking BMI, no, I I don't heavily weight body mass index into my evaluation process. I'm a pure production kind of guy. So if we're talking just purely in a vacuum, Lamb over Judy, I don't hate either one, but I think CD is obviously the superior talent there. I also want to go and go on record and say that I don't think it's very contrarian if you are looking at the overall scope of Jerry Jeudy and his profile. I don't think it's very contrarian to have him maybe fourth or fifth on your list. I think anywhere below that is we're kind of getting into the weeds there, but there are some prospects that I do like from an analytical standpoint a little bit more, as well as on tape, a little bit more than Jerry Jeudy. This is going to be a class where it's going to come down to where these guys get drafted and where the proper draft cap lands for these guys. So right now, I think that it's not necessarily contrarian to have him a little bit lower than in the middle of that top 10, or at the very least, I would say maybe middle's a little bit too egregious, but about that top 4, top 5. Anybody that has him in that one spot, I definitely do think we're probably overbiting a little bit on the profile and maybe the air quotes route running and the refinement at which he's a polished receiver. I won't argue with that, but the numbers tell a little bit of a different story. So in terms of that, but back to the original question though, the BMI is not something that I wait until after I get proper combine measurements and I get everything official. And even then, I don't weight it very much. I do weight the production overall. I know a lot of people do weight the BMI though. I think that concerns a lot of people. And if we're looking at it from Jerry Jeudy's perspective, he's not going to grade out very well in terms of his overall his overall build.
Right. Yeah. So I mean, I guess it's going to be. I think that is one thing to take into consideration is taking a look at things like that, because I mean, you look at the rest of his profile. I mean, he basically he's coming in at 6'1", 192 at a 25% dominator rating. I liked the 17.2 yards per reception, the 19.4 breakout age that he had, and obviously the 25% target share that he had there. Especially, I mean, his numbers. I think also, I mean, just from this last year that he had, I mean, from an offense that typically is more run first, I don't hate the numbers that I saw from him, but I do think that in terms of, I think he has one of the highest floors in this class, in my opinion, and then I think you could make a case for some of these guys maybe possibly have a higher ceiling.
I definitely agree there. I do think he's a safe prospect. He's a lock to go round one. And I think that's where a lot of the value is going to come. We see the highest hit rates. I mean, he has a young breakout age. He has a sustainable market share overall. I think when you look at the analytical profile, I don't think it's a question on whether or not he's going to produce. I think it's going to be a question of how much he produces. And I think right now where a lot of the overcomplication in his profile comes from is people thinking he's this otherworldly prospect when I don't see that with him. I definitely don't. And interestingly enough, when it comes to BMI and stuff, I do have a little bit of a theory, and I have not studied this at all yet. I know people that are probably better suited to go with BMI, but the one thing that I would probably look for the most is to see where these guys who have low BMI like Jerry Jeudy are being drafted. How many of them are being drafted in the first round and are getting that first round pedigree volume? Because that's where we see the highest hit rates for guys in the NFL and in fantasy in general, with the low breakout age and high draft capital. So the BMI kind of being linked to draft capital would be something that I'd be very interested in learning a little bit more about, because I think the kind of age or the age old prototype of an X wide receiver is slowly starting to change. We see guys like Tyreek Hill, Marquise Brown really coming out with smaller statures, but speed guys, really fast, really, really good route runners. And they're kind of changing the game as to where 10 to 15 years ago, these teams are spending first round draft picks on guys who are 6'4", 220, because they want that big physical X wide receiver that they can throw the ball up to, and they can play the sideline, and they can, go into the red zone and score those touchdowns. So I'd be interested in the trend there, and to see if, how many guys that do have Jerry Jeudy's BMI are having this first round draft capital, and how much of a sample can we get there to kind of throw correlation in there and see if these guys are even getting a chance, and how much of them are successful if they do. So that would be kind of my take on the BMI, and why I'm not weighting it enough, and why I should probably do a little bit more digging on that. But it's interesting stuff when we break it down that way, I think.
No, I totally agree with that and everything. So, I guess let's jump over to CeeDee Lamb. I mean, he's certainly, I think for a lot of people, is actually probably the number one prospect here. The dude is a monster, and what about Lamb do you find so attractive? And do you think Julio Jones is an outlandish comp for him?
So I think I don't know. I do see some similarities when we're looking at Julio Jones and CeeDee Lamb. But for the most part, I think that we see with Julio Jones, we see dominance in when he was on the field. We see dominance throughout his college profile coming into the NFL. He did miss a couple games. He's coming in as a younger prospect than Julio Jones. So he'll come in about a year younger than Julio. But when we look at both of their profiles kind of side by side, there's a dip in Julio Jones' second season as a sophomore. And we see a little bit of a dip in production after a really productive age 19 year. And then he comes back at age 21, and he kind of reestablishes himself as just a really, really strong wide receiver. But when we compare that to kind of CeeDee Lamb, we see just CeeDee Lamb, his freshman season, did not do a whole lot. He did a lot more than other freshman wide receivers in this class. If we're not talking about Jalen Reagor and Bryan Edwards comparably. But overall, we just see more of an ascending profile for CeeDee. So he came in and he logged about 15% of the overall receiving yards at Oklahoma at age 18, which is great. Didn't pass the threshold for a breakout, but then he grabbed 25% and then 31 at age 19 and 20, and then seemingly continued to just ascend after that freshman season. With Julio, we kind of see a really, really strong age 19 season, and then we see a dip in production at age 20, and then 21 he kind of shoots back up. So they are sort of comparable, but I would say Lamb has just more of an ascending profile, and if we look at Julio's, it's kind of a dip there. And then I would say, height is probably the big the big comparable there. CeeDee does not have the weight that Julio does. I believe Julio's sitting about 220, 225, give or take, and CeeDee Lamb is probably projected to come in about that 195 to 200 range. So Julio's got a little bit more of that thickness, a little bit more of that that prototypical build that we talked about. But both of them have really 3 strong years of Julio has 3 strong years of production in college. CeeDee has 2. It's kind of hard to compare them from an analytical perspective, but I don't think it's super outlandish if that's where you want to go. But Julio is also a unicorn, so I would tread carefully there. We don't get very many of him in our class, guys that are in draft classes, guys that can continuously do it year in and year out. So not outlandish, but I would be careful there.
Just a quick question I had on your process. How much do you weight the combine when it comes to, building your pre-draft models and that sort of thing? Because when I saw this question, that was like the one thing that jumped out to me. Like, I'm awful with comps. I hate comps. Like, it's just something like I'm not comfortable with. But the main thing that jumped out to me was their size, and I don't expect Lamb to test anywhere close to what Julio did. I mean, he was 6'3", 220 and ran a 4.3 4.40. I don't see that kind of athleticism in Lamb's profile. How much do you take the combine into your pre-draft process?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I would say that it's definitely useful to get a really good gauge on what these guys are physically capable of doing, but I wouldn't say I weight it that much. And I'll just be completely honest. I don't mind people that do, but when we just look at I'll always come back to this. Look at the production and the numbers that player X has put up. Look at what CeeDee Lamb has done in college. Look at what Jerry Jeudy has done in college. Laviska Shenault, we can go down the list. Look at what they did in college. It's very clear to me that Laviska Shenault is not going to be a 4-2 guy, but he didn't need to be. He didn't need to be an overall athletically gifted wide receiver. He's not going to run out of Indy at, beating Henry Ruggs' speed score, but it didn't stop him from being productive at a young age and from being able to solidify his role as a top player for Colorado. So when I look at the numbers that these players post, I think it's good to have a good baseline of physical thresholds that we want these players to reach and we want them to meet, but I don't weight it against a player. I think that if you're high on a player when he goes into the combine, just because he has a poor combine does not mean that he's going to be a bad player. Always revert back to the production, because the bottom line is whatever discrepancies that the player that you love or don't like had in speed, agility, in measurements and jumping, that didn't or it did play a factor in how they produced. And you can tell that by what they've put up in terms of age adjusted numbers and overall statistics in general. So I definitely it's not a make or break for me, but I think it's good to get a like I said, a baseline of what these guys are capable of doing physically, because football is a physical game. You have to be able to physically win against the competition around you. So I definitely think it's useful, but I don't weight it as much as other people.
Yeah, I think that's I think that makes a lot of sense, and I know even I did it with the Julio Jones thing, but it often seems like with comps that people try, like it's always like let's put these people as comparable to like the best ever, and it's like, yeah, this guy reminds me of Calvin Johnson or stuff like that. I'm like, why? Like you can't come up with anybody better than that. I understand that some of the stuff that when it comes to comps that you're kind of just saying like certain traits that a player has like remind you of them or certain things, and it's not necessarily saying that player is going to reach that type of level. But at the same time, I don't know. It even feels like with guys like I remember Ronald Jones a couple years ago. Everyone was saying he's Jamal Charles. I'm like, I don't know what you're seeing right now to come up with that, but like I never saw any ounce of Jamal Charles outside of, I guess they both had dreads, and I guess that was about it. Because other than that, like there was nothing comparable to me in those two prospects. But I think that a lot of times with comps, I think sometimes it can get a little outlandish and a little off base with some of these guys. But because it seems like when you like will go through and listen to people, and it's like every single prospect, like you could go through 20 wide receivers, and they're all like high profile wide receivers. I'm like, okay, we all know that these top 20 wide receivers are not all going to hit. I don't know. So, anyways, that's just my little thing with comps. I didn't mean to do it with the Julio Jones thing, but I just heard a lot of people put that out there that he reminds them of Julio Jones. So, anyways, so to keep this moving along, let's move on to number 3 here, and we have T. Higgins. Excuse me, from Clemson. He's a little bit different than a lot of these prospects that we have coming out. He profiles more of that prototypical outside wide receiver, X wide receiver, and I do know I've seen some people kind of talk about him and talk about his 40 time coming out of high school where he ran a 4.75, which I mean I think that's something he'll probably likely improve upon. But do you think he needs to really go at like a 4.5 to be able to be considered a day 2 prospect, or do you think that's overblown for outside wide receivers?
So that depends on what you want your outside wide receiver to do. If we're just looking at a guy like you want to put him in a DK Metcalf kind of role and just have him roam both sidelines, I think a 4.5 is probably it's fine. You definitely don't want him to be a plotter. You don't want him to be a guy that can't get in space and really, unless you really want to rely on his ability to separate in coverage and leverage himself against defenders. But guys of T. Higgins' stature overall, I believe he's sitting at 6'4", give or take. I think he's in the 220 range. Like you said, that prototypical X wide receiver. And what it comes down to is we're just looking at the overall production from his profile. Didn't do much at age 18, didn't have the opportunity, but we see him break out at age 19. And mind you, while Justin Ross is seemingly also having a phenomenal year in 2018 at Clemson too. And then we see him this year. I know a lot of the concern was Justin Ross kind of being the guy and kind of hindering T. Higgins again this year and kind of limiting him a little bit. But then we just absolutely see T. Higgins just absolutely go off this year. He's a guy that account for a lot of the receptions, that accounted for a lot of the receiving yards. I believe he nabbed about 14 yards per reception. I could be a little bit off there, but for the most part, he was a really dominant down the field wide receiver. Wasn't I don't believe he was used too much in short intermediate areas or as a quick out wide receiver, a guy that you want to get in too much space. He's a guy that you really just want to let go and body a DB. You want to let him get big up and you want to let him go catch the 50-50 ball. He's somebody that was really solid in that area. And so for me, I think 4.5 is totally fine. Like I said, if he's running 4.6 or later, he's probably going to be looked at as a little bit of a slower guy, and you want some aspect of speed even from a bigger guy. Like we said earlier, no one's going to come out like Julio. Julio is just he's a Clydesdale. When you watch him run, that guy just eats space, and for his size, it's not completely normal. So I'm not looking for Julio Jones level type of long speed either, or being able to eat up that much ground, but I do think T. Higgins has enough to probably get himself in that early day to maybe midday, I should say second round, excuse me. I think he honestly might have a chance if there's a team that is really, really looking for that big X kind of build wide receiver with great hands and able to be a threat in the red zone and down the field. I would probably venture to say he might creep into the back end of round one. And in that case, we're looking at a really, really strong overall profile for a guy like T. Higgins, even if he is limited. I know I would like to use DK Metcalf here, even though DK was a little bit more of a physical freak coming in. This was a guy who showed well at age 19, did have some injury concerns, but could not have landed in a better place than Seattle, where he had one of the best downfield quarterbacks. One of the guys Russell Wilson is not afraid to launch the ball down the field. He's the most accurate percentage-wise off of play action, which allows body wide receivers to get down the field. If we're looking at T. Higgins in a situation like that, with round one draft capital, I'm spending that probably late first round rookie pick on him, and I'm doing it comfortably.
Yeah, I mean with T. Higgins, just some of the numbers you mentioned. Yeah, I mean he's 6'4". I have 216. But he did have 19.8 yards per reception. Which is great. And he also, what was the other? With a 15% target share. So I think that depending on landing spot, which is going to be for most of these guys, that's what really is going to matter the most. But yeah, I think he's going to be an interesting prospect. And I also have never seen a wide receiver with longer legs than he does. He's like all legs and little torso. It's the first time I ever saw him, I was like, this man has some legs on him. But not that matters for anything. But anyways, okay, so let's we jump over to another one, and I think this is a guy that I believe you are really fond of, and I think he's somebody that a lot of people are starting to get into, and that is Jalen Reagor from TCU. 5'11", 194, had a 36.7 dominator rating, great breakout age of 18.7. Had an awesome target share with 23.5, 32% in 2018. Now, excuse me, with Reagor, I feel like that he is somebody that is kind of the perfect example of not really waiting too much in terms of just basic counting stats like receiving yards or touchdowns, because Jalen Reagor is somebody who played in a really terrible offense in TCU, and if you just go off of his stats, you're not going to be very impressed because he just wasn't able to do a lot. But if you dig a little bit deeper and go into more of his target share, and you see that he was kind of the focal point of this offense, and I think everything else about him that you kind of dig into makes him a really exciting prospect. What are your thoughts on him?
Yeah, he's somebody that I've been on for a while now. Somebody that I absolutely love. Overall, I love his film. I love his analytical profile. He's one of those guys that seemingly just you get lucky with, and everything just lines up. And to go with your question, I think this is absolutely him and Tyler Johnson for me are the two guys where you look at their raw statistics and they look a little bit underwhelming. Some of Tyler Johnson's raw statistics in his age 19 season, you're going to be like, I don't understand. Same thing with Jalen Reagor this past year. When we look at his raw metrics and we're not able to digest like how we're able to elevate a guy like this who couldn't, and I don't know his raw statistics off the top of my head, so excuse me, but somebody who couldn't push over 1,000 yards and somebody who doesn't have double-digit touchdowns in the college game, a lot of the casual people that look at that are going to write a guy like Jalen Reagor off. But when we grab the whole entire scope of what he did, and we isolate it just this year, which is his age 20 season, we see that he still grabbed over 20% of the receptions there, over 25% of the receiving yards there, and 33% of the receiving touchdowns there. So I'm not really, and that's just this year. If we want to go back to his age 19 season, we see he had an overall dominator in his age 19 season, about 44.2, which grades absolutely elite. Second single season dominator, only to Tyler Johnson among these guys that we're looking at right now. And then we see his age 18 season, and Jalen Reagor is actually one of only two wide receivers that broke out at age 18. He's the only one that broke out at age 18, as Brian Edwards broke out at 17. That's wild. But Jalen Reagor, he's another guy that I think a team could really fall in love with his speed, could really fall in love with the versatility that he offers downfield. He's a little bit smaller than a guy like T. Higgins, but I'm telling you, this guy can high point. He can go up. He can adjust at the catch point to a ball. He can really, really put a defensive back on skates. So when you look at him and you look at his profile, I think, like I said, it's where the two kind of analytically and film kind of marry together, and you get a guy like Jalen Reagor, and you get lucky with him. And if he does creep into the back end of that first, or I think, a team is really, really going to be blown away about what he's going to do at the combine. Rumors have it that he ran a 4.3, I believe, in high school. If I'm not mistaken, I can't remember what the narrative there was, but he's gone on record to say he's the fastest guy in this class, even over a guy like Henry Ruggs. So I think a team is going to be absolutely blown away by his skill set and what he's able to do physically. I think when you look at the analytics and you see how dominant he was, even on a horrid TCU offense this year, and then you look at you just go back to the tape and see all the things that he's able to do as a downfield threat, as a short area threat, a guy that you really want to get in space. I think he has a really, really, really strong potential to end in that back half of that first round. And for me, if that happens and he does get first round draft capital, I am probably going to stick him up there with CeeDee Lamb. And it would probably be CeeDee Lamb and Jalen Reagor that would probably be the two guys I'm most comfortable biting on, just from historical hit rates of wide receivers that have first round draft cap, that have an age 18 breakout, and a guy with Jalen Reagor's skill set. I'm excited about him. He's somebody that I've loved for a really, really long time. He makes up a considerable amount of my Devy teams. And I'm excited to see him blow up the combine here in a couple weeks. I'm excited to see what he does and how he cements himself in the draft. So I absolutely love him. I think people are sleeping on him. If you don't have him in that top 4 or 5 wide receivers, you're already late. And so I'm hoping things kind of pan out for him.
Yeah, don't let the size fool you. The 5'11", 195 or whatever it was. He plays a lot bigger than that. He's aggressive. He attacks the ball. Jesse already touched on his ability to high point and the adjustments that he makes. And I'm personally a sucker for the double move, and he has a couple of those that just with it combined with his speed is just it's a pretty sight.
You know which team that really loves speed and picks in the back half of the draft, and it is likely going to be looking for a wide receiver.
Okay, we're moving on now. And we are moving on to the next prospect, right?
All right, let's do it. We can fill in the blank of whoever that could be. A team that loves speed. But anyways, speaking of speed, The next guy that is Henry Ruggs, which seems to be one of the more kind of polarizing players in this upcoming draft. I've seen people. I remember, people getting caught up in like, vividness bias with him a couple of times this year on Twitter when he had a big play, and people are saying that he's the next Tyreek Hill, which is crazy because even Tyreek Hill is a little bit of an outlier, especially at his size. But they do have some at least similar traits when I've kind of looked at them. I know that it's rumored that he ran a 4.25, which would put him right around where Tyreek Hill is. Obviously, he only had a 13% target share, only a 17% dominator rating. Those aren't really great numbers to really go off of. He's 6 foot 190, which is a little bit bigger than what Tyreek Hill is. Some of the stuff with looking at him, I mean, he does have the ability to kind of go up and high point the ball. Has some, which is something that kind of separates Tyreek Hill at his size that a lot of guys his size can't do. But is that who he is, or is that way over bounds? And is he because I think he could be anywhere from a Deshaun Jackson type all the way to maybe like just a Ted Ginn.
Yeah, so for me, I lean probably more towards the Ted Ginn comp. Henry Ruggs is a guy I don't think he's a bad wide receiver, but the glaring issues with his profile are the fact that he could never beat out any of the other talent at Alabama to solidify himself as an actual producing wide receiver there. So the issue becomes, and we can kind of if you want to strip away all the fancy numbers, even though this is probably the best point I can make right now, but if you strip away everything, the fancy numbers, the speed, the film, and everything, and you maybe not the film, but if you look at just him in general, he was the third and sometimes fourth best wide receiver on that offense. But he ceded a lot of work to Jalen Waddle even last year too. Jalen Waddle is a phenomenal talent. Can't wait to get to him in the future. But throughout his entire career, he never was able to grab over it, even just past the threshold of about 20% of his team's offense. And in a high-powered offense like Alabama, who does spread the ball around, and we see guys like Jerry Jeudy and Devontae Smith have a considerable market share there. My issue is if intuitively, if you want to kind of disregard and say, we haven't seen teams that have had three NFL talent, first round NFL talent wide receivers on a single offense, I'd probably point you to maybe Clemson or Louisiana State, where Odell Beckham and Jarvis Landry. There's more than enough volume to go around for three wide receivers to pass a threshold of about 20%. And then that only makes up about 60% of the overall passing volume. And then that's another 40% that's up to grabs for maybe another wide receiver or the running backs and the tight ends. You can divvy that up whatever way you want. But conceivably, it is not hard for three wide receivers to come in and have over 20% of the market share there. Henry Ruggs, just bottom line for me, he was not good enough to do it. And the issue that I have is people are saying, he's a first round wide receiver talent. Well, how much of that is being touted by other people telling us he is? Because the numbers don't add up there. The numbers definitely don't tell me that he is. The numbers tell me that he struggled to beat out Jerry Jeudy and Devontae Smith and Jalen Waddle at times. And then when I see that, I see people touting him as a top 12 wide receiver. I've seen some people have him in that top 5, top 3 area. And for me, that's perplexing, because if he couldn't do it at Alabama and he couldn't beat Jerry Jeudy and Devontae Smith and Jalen Waddle and whatever tight end that they had there and the running backs there, if he couldn't do that at Alabama, how can we expect him to transition to the NFL that has actual NFL talent, and for him to be able to compete with those guys and have a considerable production trajectory throughout his career? I just don't see it. And we don't get very many Tyreek Hills. I think that we need to intuitively think about the way that we look at a guy like Henry Ruggs and how much we're really elevating his draft stock in terms of where he's going to go. I honestly think that teams that do want a speed element are going to draft him in the first round. And if he does go in the first round, we're going to have to consider that and take that for what it is. But even then, his his overall profile suggests that even if he does have the first round draft capital, that he still only has situational upside. He's going to have to go to a team that doesn't have an overly dominant alpha wide receiver. I've said it before. I think a team like the New York Jets without Robbie Anderson would be probably a good situation because he's only going to be competing with Le'Veon Bell and Jamison Crowder there for targets. In that situation, he can have usable weeks. But if he goes anywhere, if he goes to if he goes to the Vikings, or those are just where they have two alphas there, or if even the Packers that has one alpha, I'm very worried about his production and what that means for him, because he couldn't do it in college, and I'm very, very speculative that he'll be able to do it in the NFL. So I'm not willing to tag him with anything right now. I don't think he's a guy that I'm going to be on. He's somebody that I'm actually adamantly off right now. And take that for what you will, but I'm just cautious with guys like that. Historic metrics and historical does not favor a guy like Henry Ruggs, even if he does have the speed.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. He was someone who I was excited to get to. I don't get a chance to watch too much college during this season, and from like Jesse, like you said, some people having him in their top 3, top 5. Like one of my buddies that I talk to all the time, he was really high on him, and I threw on the tape, and I was just like, "This is it." Like he's fast. Like you're not going to take that away from him at all. He has the speed, but like this is like one of those things that Kev brought up with Rojo and the dreadlock thing. So because he's smaller framed and fast, that all of a sudden he's Tyreek Hill, like that doesn't make sense. And for me, like even his explosive speed, that initial quickness off the line, like I didn't really see it. Like it kind of takes him, 10 yards to get up to full speed. I thought someone like Jesse, you mentioned Laviska Shenault. I thought he had quicker burst off the line. Somebody like we'll be getting to here in a little bit, Brandon Ayuk. I thought he had better initial burst and quickness. So I'm glad I'm not alone on being lower on Ruggs.
I feel like with him as well, I think that another thing to mention is when we were talking about landing spot is he's also going to need to go to a team that's going to be willing to throw the ball to him deep down the field. Because if he gets paired with a quarterback who likes to check it down or something like that, then that is going to be the utmost terrible spot for him as well. So I think there's a lot of factors for him to really pan out at the next level and not turn into be a John Ross type of career trajectory where they just really haven't been able to take off. So I think that is something to mention with him. And so yeah, like I'm not super high on him either, but I just know that he seems to be somebody that a lot of people are in love with. And I think it's the speed. And you're right. I would be surprised if he wasn't a first round or an early second round pick because of that speed. Teams love that speed. And we saw last year the Chiefs kind of go out of nowhere where nobody was, really expecting McCole Hardman to go in the second round of drafts, and the Chiefs went up and got him because of his speed. So we just kind of see this type of player go high every year. And so, is he going to be that? I don't know. Is he going to reach a Deshaun Jackson type of, level? I think that is a little bit wishful thinking. And I think he can end up being more of a Ted Ginn type. So it'll be fun to watch with him. And I know Twitter is going to lose their minds at the combine whenever he runs his 40 and sees him in shorts. So anyways.
The one thing that I do want to say is I hope that he does have a really impressive combine. I really do, because that is going to push real talent like Tyler Johnson and Jalen Reagor and T. Higgins and other guys of that nature down my rookie drafts, and I am here for it. I will probably target the guy that I know loves Henry Ruggs, and I will probably trade back in my draft to accumulate a couple more picks just so I can get over on that guy. This is an exploitable piece, people. This is what you're supposed to do in fantasy. Make sure you're targeting people like this. Make sure you exploit the Henry Ruggs lovers in this draft, because they will be there, and they will come, and they will pay for him, and you will be right there to take their money.
Such a great point.
Preach. So, all right. So let's keep it moving here so we can get through these guys. The next one up on the list is Justin Jefferson from LSU. a good example of somebody that's able to dominate in the face of having somebody else there that is just as dominant. Jalen Jefferson, he's another guy that kind of projects more as that outside X wide receiver. However, he was not used that way at LSU. He was much more of a primary slot guy. So I know some people have some concerns with it, but he comes in 6'3", 192 at a 30% dominator rating, 19.6 breakout age, 21% target share in that offense, had a monster year. Another guy who kind of had a slow 40 coming out of high school, ran a 4.8. But, with him, obviously I think everybody is licking their chops from Jamar Chase when he comes out next year. But right now, I mean, Jefferson still dominated 2019 and had a monster season of his own right. But are you concerned with, like I mentioned, that that he basically was the primary slot guy, or do you see maybe a possibility where he turns out to be a Keenan Allen type?
No, I think him being kind of a little bit of a profile that's a bigger slot, I think, is probably perfectly fine and where he's best suited. The thing with him being in the slot, though, and especially this year with Jamar Chase, is when we look at his overall profile, we see that he was able to compete at a high level and still maintain a very, very high quality production trajectory, even while Jamar Chase was on the field and absolutely dominating and having his breakout season. Intuitively, we talked about that kind of on the flip side. Henry Ruggs looking like, he wasn't able to establish himself. He wasn't able to beat out the talent around him. Justin Jefferson is a guy that really intrigues me because of the other side of that, because Jamar Chase had such an outstanding season, but yet we did not see a significant downfall to Justin Jefferson's profile. If we want to go back to his last year, to 2018 at age 19, his breakout season, logged 30% of the receiving yards, 30.7% of the receiving touchdowns, and had 24% of the receptions there. Fast forward to this year, alongside Jamar Chase in what was a magical season at LSU, we saw 25.8% of his receptions and then we saw 25.7% of his receiving yards, and then 32% of LSU's overall receiving touchdowns. So the only place that we saw a little bit of a downtick there was about 5% in the receiving yards department. That's not concerning at all, considering a lot of the passing volume that happened at LSU with Joe Burrow and how a lot of that was going to Jamar Chase and a lot of that was going. Clyde Edwards-Helaire had 55 receptions this year too. I definitely don't count that guy out for being a major contributor in the passing game this year. There were pieces around Justin Jefferson that were eating volume. And the difference is he was able to overcome that because he's a good player, and he was able to still maintain a very high level of production there. So young breakout age, operated mostly in the slot. That's fine. I think the slot is now a nuanced position, and I think a lot of the best route runners and the best players actually play exclusively in the slot. We see you kind of throughout Keenan Allen. We see Keenan Allen really transition from the Y to the Z. He can play the X sometimes, but you really see him being more of a complementary piece, but his numbers suggest he's an alpha, which is not abnormal for a lot of these wide receivers that are coming in and being able to operate in the slot and put up really, really high numbers there. So no, it definitely doesn't worry me that he's exclusively, or probably will be, he'll be a transition piece between a Z and a Y. I believe his skill set and his overall physical profile will lend him to that. But the numbers just scream to me very, very solid prospect. A very, very solid guy who was able to handle other NFL wide receiver talent around him, over NFL talent in general around him. And he's just a producer. He's a guy that I think is also going to go probably day 2, and I'm perfectly fine with that. We see the highest success rates for fantasy inside of that the round from rounds 1 to 3. So as long as he comes in, I would probably prefer rounds 1 and 2. But even if he comes in at 3, I'm comfortable there, because he's shown me that any situation that he goes to, it could be a high powered team that just dishes a lot of volume, a lot of passing volume, or it could even be a lower level team. If he goes to a lower level team that doesn't have as many weapons. He's going to be an outright dominant wide receiver there, but he's also going to be a dominant wide receiver in a team that passes the ball a lot, that does have an alpha there, maybe even two. He's a guy that can come in and really fight his way into some volume, and he's going to produce with it. So he's a guy I'm looking to snag in probably the front half of my rookie drafts this year, and I think he's well worth it, depending on where he's going to go in the actual NFL draft.
Yeah, I like everything you said. I like the way he profiles from his production to his tape and everything else. I mean, Jesse, you already touched on it, that the number ones in NFL offenses are changing now. They no longer have to be the 6'4", 230-pound jump ball guys on the outside. So as long as he goes somewhere where he's getting volume, I mean, that's really the only thing that matters. But Jesse, we know you're on a little bit of a time constraint here, and you've mentioned this guy a little bit, and personally I want to hear you whisper sweet nothings about Tyler Johnson, because he's somebody that I am also a little bit higher on. I currently have him in like my tier 2 of receivers, but he seems to be getting pushed down lists for whatever reason that is. So talk to me about Tyler Johnson.
Yeah, he's a guy that if pre-draft right now, I released my first run at tiers a couple weeks ago, and he's a guy that you have to slot him in there based on the production that he's given us from breakout age of 19, and he's just been absolutely dominant ever since. We're talking 61% or a 61.3% dominator at age 19, a 51.5% dominator at age 20. And then this is where I think the profile gets a little bit dicey, is I wish he would have came out last year. There is a little bit of a trend for wide receivers that go back for their fourth year, and they don't produce with the overall trend line that you want to see an older wide receiver hit, because believe it or not, these threshold numbers are great, but it doesn't stay at around 20% through 4 years of college. So we want to see a wide receiver in their fourth year grab a little bit more. We want to see them be able to grab more and more of that offense and continuously ascend. So he did have a little bit of a downtick in production this year, pretty considerably actually, but I think we can add context there. We saw Rashad Bateman kind of come alive this year as a sophomore. He had a really good year last year, I believe. If I remember correctly, he's a sophomore. But either way, I think that Rashad Bateman just kind of coming into his own had a lot to do with that. Overall, I love Tyler Johnson's profile. He's probably the most dominant wide receiver in this class in terms of the overall production that he had. Looking at his breakout year, age 19, that Minnesota offense, I will say this, age 19 accounted for 77.7% of the receiving touchdowns there, along with 44.7% of the receiving yards. Now, a lot of that might be skewed by the fact that 77%, Tyler Johnson caught 7 of the 9 total passing touchdowns that Minnesota threw that year. I believe that was 2017. So of course his numbers are going to be very, very high. When you only throw 9 touchdowns and one of those players catches 7 of them, his numbers are going to be very, very inflated. But that kind of goes to show that that's how dominant Tyler Johnson is. When they were looking to get the ball in the paint, that's who they went to. And accounting for 44.7% of the overall receiving yards there too, they're looking for that guy to produce in between the 20s as well. So when we look at these numbers and we look at a guy like Tyler Johnson, who has 3 really, really strong years of production, I know people are going to knock him for going back to his senior year, but he's inarguably the most dominant wide receiver in this class in terms of overall age-adjusted market share. He is you have Jalen Rigger kind of sitting with him in an age 19 season, but overall, I think he's going to come down to the draft capital. I know a lot of people just see a pretty just a smooth overall wide receiver. That's what I see when I see him on film. He doesn't do anything spectacular. He is just a guy who goes and gets it done. He's smooth. He is consistent. He's a football player. That's what you see. Strong hands in traffic. He's able to put the ball in the red zone, but he's not an exciting player, which might kind of throw teams off of him. They might look at the production and the raw statistics and say, okay, our team doesn't necessarily need a guy like that until maybe the later round. So my only issue and my only holdup with him is going to be where the draft capital lands for him. If he lands anywhere on between day 1 and day 2, I'm perfectly comfortable taking him, depending on where others might have him leading up to the rookie drafts. I'd be perfectly comfortable taking him at the beginning, middle, and even end if he slips there of that second round. His overall profile is beautiful. I'm a big Tyler Johnson truther, and I think he's going to be a phenomenal talent if he gets the opportunity that these early round guys get.
What about the difference between him and Brian Edwards? Because to me, I think Brian Edwards, I have him a little bit higher. I think he's just a little bit more athletic, but they kind of, like you said on Tyler Johnson, there's nothing that neither of them are extremely good at. They're both just really solid all around, not a lot of holes in their game. And Edwards kind of has the same thing where he went back for his senior year when he could have came out last year. So do they profile similarly to you?
Yeah, Brian Edwards, another 4-year wide receiver that's coming into this class. There are similarities. I think Brian Edwards is a guy that I also really like, but it's at the age of which he produced the way that he produced that really intrigues me. We're talking about he was 17 for half of his freshman season, and that qualifies as an age 17 breakout. Now, I don't believe I have any age 17 breakouts in my database. Brian Edwards is the first, and when you're able to do that at such a young age, I think that's really, really telling. But then when we look at Brian Edwards and both Deebo Samuel on the field at the same time, there are very strong indicators that suggest that Brian Edwards was not only slightly better than Deebo, but he was a guy that was able to hold his own, especially in red zone situations and in terms of market share of receiving touchdowns. But he was a guy that strongly competed with Deebo Samuel, and we see how Deebo Samuel translated to the NFL. I don't really understand why people aren't on Brian Edwards a little bit more, because everyone was on Deebo Samuel coming out, and Deebo Samuel had a fair amount of injury concerns, had some holes in his profile, and Brian Edwards has nothing but really, really strong metrics throughout his entire career at South Carolina. So for me, I don't necessarily think that Tyler Johnson and Brian Edwards profile the same. Tyler Johnson was much more dominant in his respective offense, but last year dealing with Rashad Bateman, we did see that dip. Brian Edwards just kind of continuously produced from age 17 all the way through age 20, and he does come in at a really good age. He is coming in at age 20 despite playing those 4 years at South Carolina. So he's kind of, just thinking about it too right now, he's kind of he's going to be a weird prospect to kind of pin on what can we expect from him, because we really don't have a comp that we can say, okay, he broke out at age 17 and now he's entering the draft at age 20. He's still entering at a very young age. He won't be 21, 22 when he hits the NFL draft. He's going to be 20. And so I think he's kind of a curious case there. So I wouldn't say comparisons outside of maybe both of them spending 4 years at their respective schools. But yeah, Brian Edwards, another really intriguing prospect. I don't know why a lot of people aren't on him even more, and they should be.
Yeah, I mean, he seems like a guy that a lot of people are kind of. I think I've seen him as high for people as 3 or 4, and then you see him as low as 12 or 13 for people. But I think there's a lot to like with Brian Edwards as well, and I think he is one of the more interesting prospects. And I know I've seen some knocks against him when it comes to his athleticism, but I did see somewhere, I think that he was clocked this year, by kind of like next gen stats, where he one play he got up to 22 miles an hour, which I think was the highest among any wide receiver this year. So I think he certainly is a little bit underrated in terms of his athleticism. So. The next guy we want to get to is someone we've kind of talked, or you kind of hit on a little bit, but Laviska Shenault out of Colorado. I think he's another interesting prospect here. Again, not in a great offense out of Colorado. 6'2", 220, had a 35% dominator rating, 19.9 breakout age. Did have a 20% target share, but he was somebody that was kind of just a jack of all trades sort of in that offense. He was deployed as kind of that do-it-all player. They put him at Wildcat. They had him run, be a running back at wide receiver. I think even I saw somewhere that maybe he played some tight end as well for them. I mean, he's just kind of an interesting prospect here. But how do you feel that he is going to be utilized, in the NFL? Is he going to be somebody that's kind of like a Percy Harvin, Cordell Patterson type, or is he somebody that's going to be able to come in and just be a pure wide receiver?
Yeah, that's probably my main hangup when I'm evaluating him. Is he does have really good age-adjusted metrics. We did see a dip this year in his age 20 season. From his age 19 season, we did see a pretty significant dip in production, but I think that's because from what I've seen, from what I've seen with Shenault on tape, they didn't really have a set place to use him this year. And I know last year, the 2018 as well, he probably had a little versatility in his game, but I think he was used more as a wide receiver in 2018 than he was this previous season in 2019. Now, I saw him line up in the Wildcat. I saw him line up in the slot. I saw him line up as a tight end. I saw him line up in the backfield. I saw him used in so many interesting ways. And for me, that either hurts or it helps a guy. Right now, he's a wide receiver. That's what we have him listed at. He's an uber athlete. I think he is going to test very, very well for his size and his weight. I think that he's a guy that runs very hard, runs well, does well in contact balance, does well in the open field. He's got good hands. He can catch well. He's a very well-rounded athlete. He can high point. He can run. He can do it all. My issue there is probably what is he going to do and what is a team going to ask him to do? And that kind of worries me more for fantasy purposes, because I think Laviska Shenault is going to be an amazing a player in the NFL. I think we're going to see a lot of flashes of greatness from him. I think you're going to see a lot of really fun things from him in the league. But my issue would be where do teams kind of value him? Where is he going to be used? Because typically we want to see him being used as a wide receiver, catching passes. He has the profile to do it. It's just going to be whether or not a team thinks he has the pedigree to do it, and the team thinks and they're willing to kind of groom him to revert from some of that versatility and just stick him at a wide receiver position. And that's not to say he can't run sweeps. He can't be used on wide receiver screens, because he can. But we want to see him used in that role more for fantasy purposes. Like I said, we want to see him kind of have a solidified role with the team that he goes to. Can they harness that athletic ability? Can they use the fact that he's an age 19 breakout and that he has 2 really good years of solid production? Even though he did take a dip this year, he still was above the threshold that we look for an age 20 wide receiver. So for me, it's going to come down to where he lands and what team gives him that draft capital. He's definitely he's in that tier 3 for me, I believe, right now. If I'm not mistaken, I do have him. I actually still have him in tier 2, probably the bottom of tier 2, more of a fringe guy, I would say. But interesting prospect, a guy that has loads of versatility, loads of athleticism. He's somebody that I'm excited to get a little bit deeper on and get a couple more data points for him, and hopefully we can dial in where we should be picking this guy in rookie drafts.
Yeah, no, I think he's going to be kind of an interesting prospect, and really it's going to be fun to see kind of what NFL teams decide to do with them. But he's somebody that's been able to show to be able to do multiple things. So I know you have to get out of here. I know we just want to get to one more guy if you have time, and then we will get you out of here. We really appreciate you joining us today. Really a lot of good information I think we were getting out here on these guys. Just the last guy is Brandon Ayuk from Arizona State. He seems to be a guy that's kind of climbing a lot of people's rankings right now. But I do know one thing with him that I think that people are a little concerned with would be his late breakout age. He has 21.5 breakout age, which is like 26th percentile, but he did have a strong college dominator at 40.6, which is 82nd percentile. He had a strong year this year, almost 1,200 yards, 8 touchdowns, 26% target share. So there's a lot to like there, but are you concerned at all with his breakout age?
Absolutely. This is a guy that I have in probably that fifth tier of wide receivers right now. I know a lot of people that watch a lot of tape really like him. I think that they like his overall profile. I think he has pretty good speed. I have yet to watch more than 1 to 2 games on him overall. But I think the issue for me is he just kind of had a really drastic turn of events after N'Keal Harry left ASU. This is also a guy who started 2 years at Sierra College, I believe, if I remember correctly. He was at Sierra College, which is a junior college. Had a couple good seasons there, I believe, but transferred to ASU, and we see his age 20 season. He did not do very much at all behind a guy like N'Keal Harry. He only had about 15% of the receiving yards and 15% of the receiving touchdowns, accounted for about 15.3% dominator rating. And then in his age 21 season, we just see him absolutely go off. And for me, that's kind of it's more telling. It's more telling of the wide receiver in a negative way than a positive way. When you see elite level talent like N'Keal Harry, and yes, I still do think N'Keal Harry is elite level talent. When you see N'Keal Harry, a guy of his profile, when you see him leave and then the next man up kind of has this absolutely boom season, that's very telling that one, Brandon Ayuk was not able to compete with N'Keal Harry. So it's hard for me to imagine that. And N'Keal Harry went the back end of the first round, which leads me to believe it's going to be very, very hard for him to come in and compete with NFL talent at any level of any draft capital. It's going to be hard for him to come in and compete with those guys right off the jump. And two, I think that it comes down to more of how much are you willing to invest in that one strong season? Because I think it's a flash in the pan. I think we saw him come in. If you want to add the context that maybe he struggled a little bit coming in from junior college to Power 5 school, sure, I can see that narrative, and that would probably require a little bit more digging. But the bottom line is we can always play the what if game, but the bottom line is he didn't outproduce a really, really good wide receiver. He didn't outproduce the talent around him at ASU his first year there. And then he just goes on to have this absolute dominant flash in the pan type season. So for me, I'm very weary of a guy like that, and he's probably somebody that I'm willing to because he did show. I want to be clear, he did show that he can do it. He did pass thresholds his senior year, and he at age 21 had a monster season with a 38.6% dominator rating, accounting for 38% of that overall the overall receiving work for ASU. He did prove that he can do it. So he's not somebody that I'm completely off, because I do believe there is some situational upside there potentially. So he's somebody that I'm probably looking at throwing the dart for, or throwing the dart on in the back half of probably the 4th round in my rookie drafts. 3rd, maybe, depending on where he lands, if I like a favorable position, but probably early 4th to late 4th would be the range that I'm looking for some Ayuk shares.
All right, great stuff as always. I really, again, I know you have to get out of here. You have you're big time, and you got another podcast to jump on, which I totally understand. I really appreciate you coming on and joining us today.
First of all, I am not big time. Don't say that, because I am not. I'm just a guy who probably overschedules himself to talk about football and has nothing else better to do on a what day is it even? It's Tuesday, on a Tuesday night. So no, I appreciate you guys getting me on here. Thank you so much for lending me your platform to just hang out and talk some football with you guys, especially wide receivers. It's kind of my forte. I love talking to those guys. So thanks for lending me your platform. And as always, I'm humbled when anybody asks me to get on their show, their podcast, and everything. So thank you guys more than anything for having me on.
Absolutely, man. Thank you.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. So yeah, we'll have to definitely get you back on again, maybe post draft or something like that, and kind of go back and kind of re-dig into this after we have all the final pieces in place to understand where these guys are going.
Absolutely, and I'd be more than welcome to hop on and kind of you guys can blow up all my cold takes. So that'll be a fun show. When Henry Ruggs goes, it was the first wide receiver off the board, you guys can all say, I told you so, or something, So thanks again, guys. Reach out. I'll be back on anytime.
All right. Appreciate it.
Thanks, man.
All right, guys, have a good one.
You too. All right. Again, you can find Jesse on Twitter. Just a little shout out for where you can find him at. You can find him at Jesse Reeves FF. And again, he does a podcast called the Draft Dialogue. Really good stuff where they break down all the prospects as well. So we have a couple more guys we want to get to before wrapping this up. So I didn't want to miss out on these guys. We did say top 12. So the next one on our list was KJ Hamler for Penn State. He is somebody that I guess. Cody, you should be familiar with as the resident Penn State fan over here. But KJ Hamler kind of comes out very small stature. He's listed at 5'9", 174, had a 31.7 dominant rating, 19.2 breakout age, which is something that you're definitely looking at or looking for. He also had posted a 25% target share, and it's 2 years that he was eligible at Penn State. He had at least a 20% target share in this offense. So this offense isn't one that is typically a pass first offense, and the numbers that he put up I think are pretty impressive. What are you looking for from KJ Hamler? And again, we've kind of talked about how speed kills. It's somebody that teams could take a little bit higher, a la the Chiefs last year.
Yeah, man. He was a 4-star recruit coming into school. I think he was originally kind of slated to go to like Michigan State somewhere, and then ended up at Penn State a little later in the process. But man, he was one of those guys that anytime the ball was headed his way as a Penn State fan, you kind of just like clenched up because you were just expecting him to take a slant 80 yards to the house. So I think he's going to do well at the combine. There seems to be something in the water at Penn State where even white boys like Troy Apke, Deion Sanders catching him after he ran his 40, and he said, "You're not just white boy fast." So there's the strength and conditioning program up there that they just pump these guys out. So he's going to do well in the combine as long as he gets the draft capital. That's the biggest thing, and it's something I wish we would have had more time to talk to Jesse about. As far as landing spots and capital and all that stuff, that's going to be the biggest thing that determines how early or if these guys even get a chance to really show what they have. So just someone who's super electric in space can, he can get by anybody. He's a decent route runner. He's also somebody who also has those double moves, and cornerbacks are going to be playing off of him more often than trying to press him, because if he gets by you, he's gone. As long as that ball isn't underthrown, you're not catching back up to Hamler. So he's somebody that I really like. Obviously the Penn State bias aside, but I mean, dude, if he would land somewhere like KC, I mean, I feel like Kansas City is going to start becoming, the Patriots from 5-6 years ago. Well, imagine if he lands in New England. I think KC is going to become that new spot that everyone's, running backs and receivers alike. So, have you gotten to look at Hamler at all outside of maybe some stats? Have you watched him at all? Do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, again, I think he is going to be profiled more as that deep threat. Somebody who could end up being, just simply a pure burner. Somebody that the teams just dial up as as a deep threat. I don't know. I mean, I guess I think you could maybe talk about, a T.Y. Hilton type, but I think I've seen people, comp him to T.Y. Hilton, and it's kind of some of the things he can do, but I also could see a scenario where he turns into be Travis Benjamin, But yeah, I mean, like I said, I mean, the NFL is, all aboard this speed train, this, smaller wide receivers who can absolutely burn. So, I think KJ Hamler is going to be another interesting prospect to kind of see where he lands, if he lands in the right spot, maybe like a Philly or something like that with a Carson Wentz or, I think he's landing spot dependent. And, it's going to be interesting to see where he goes. And I think that's going to ultimately depend on, what you think of him. So past that, I think the last guy we have to talk about is Denzel Mims from Baylor, which anytime you say Baylor and wide receivers, let's talk about it. You talk about Penn State and the Chris Godwins and the Allen Robinsons that they've been able to produce the last few years from that school. Then you go to Baylor and you got the Corey Colemans and the Katie Cannons of the world coming from Baylor, who had some hype around this time of the year, the last couple of seasons, and as we know, have not really panned out to be anything. Denzel Mims. I think that's something that a lot of people are scared off of him about. But if you look at him, I mean, he's 6'3", 206, an excellent dominator rating of 42.3. He had a 19.9 breakout age. Solid season this year, 24% target share. So kind of everything you want to look for in a wide receiver. But how much of that bias, or how hard is it to kind of get that out of of him, or to get that out of your head whenever you're drafting in your rookie drafts and kind of when you're looking at these guys, because I do think a lot of people are going to look at Baylor, a wide receiver from Baylor, and be really, scared off.
Oh yeah, for sure. And I was a Katie Cannon fan. And when you look at those two, you have guys that are on both sides of it. Corey Coleman, first round pick, and I don't think Katie Cannon was drafted, right? I think he was a UDFA somewhere. I think he landed with the Jets and then maybe skipped around a little bit after that. But I mean, that's something that I try to look past, because once you get past a certain point, you're looking at different schemes and coaching and that sort of thing. So with Denzel Mims, he's a lot of fun to watch, man. He might have the best body control and like field spatial awareness out of anybody in this class. I mean, he has some absurd catches, and what did you call it last year? Toe touch swag was at it. Kev was out here doing calisthenics. If you've been riding with us for a little bit, but Denzel Mims, man, he's somebody I'm going to be higher on. I feel like I'm higher on him than most. I saw a tweet the other day. Ben Fennell, who does NFL draft work for the NFL Network, he grouped together some guys that he think could run sub 4.4 40s, and it was obviously your Ruggs and your Hamlers, and then the last name on that list was Denzel Mims. And he's almost 6'3", I think, pushing close to like 205, 210, something like that. So if he's one of those guys that if he runs, I mean, even if he runs a 4.4 flat, that's still moving at his size. And then you're going to see him, that's going to cause his NFL draft stock to probably to bump up, which then in turn is going to cause his Dynasty rookie value to also bump up. So I'm kind of hoping that he doesn't hit that, so I can so I can snag him in the second round, as opposed to having to think about taking him at the back end of the first, possibly, depending on just how high he goes in the NFL draft. But he's somebody that I like so far early on in this process, and that I'm excited to see how everything pans out over the next 2 months.
Yeah, I agree. I think we're only a couple of weeks away from the combine, and I feel like that this group and this class is at least the wide receivers, I think, is so deep. Like, we didn't even get to all the other guys that there is out there. The Devin Duvernays and the Colin Johnson. I mean, there's another list of guys we could have went through. Yeah. Another 12 to 15 guys that I think that are going to change drastically once we get to combine. And we're going to look at these guys, and there's going to be a big shuffle of everybody's rookie rankings, because that's what everybody does. As soon as the combine happens, we see people running shorts, and all of a sudden it's like, all right, we got to shake everything up now, right? And then again, it's going to happen again, when it really should happen is after the NFL draft, and then we see how draft capital plays a part, and where these guys land, and their opportunities, and everything else. And that's going to be the biggest point. But I mean, my biggest takeaway from the wide receiver position right now is just how incredibly deep it is. I don't know if it'll pan out that way, because like last year, I don't think last year's rookie wide receivers class, I don't think many people thought that it was going to produce as many players as it did, at least in year one. So it's hit or miss. But right now, I think that this class, when you look at it with the CeeDee Lambs, the Jerry Judys, the Jalen Ragers, I mean, there's so many guys here in this group that I think you could make a case for to be in the top 5. Even like a Brian Edwards that we talked about. He seems to be somebody that is criminally undervalued, and Tyler Johnson as well. Where there's a lot of these guys that's just kind of like, whatever your flavor is right now is the guy. So, but I think when it comes to the combine, I would look at it, I would use it. I wouldn't. We already know, like, for example, like, we already know Henry Ruggs is fast. Like, we're not breaking new ground by saying that. But I guarantee you, when he runs his 40 and he runs a 4.29, everyone's gonna be like, "Oh my God! Like, what is happening? Oh my!" No, he's wide receiver 3 now. But like, we already knew that.
Right.
We didn't learn anything new. So I don't know. I think that's something that's gonna happen, and it always happens with these guys.
Yeah, it always happens, and I think the important takeaway here is to not double count what we already know. Like, we know he's fast. When he runs his fast 40, don't double count that and move him up whenever that's something that we already know. And then on the other side of that, I can't remember who we were talking about with Travis last week. There was somebody Devin Singletary. Awful combine. Like, it probably couldn't have gone much worse for him, especially at his size and the 40 he ran in his 3-cone and everything. But he's somebody who, whenever you watched him, he didn't play how he tested. So, I mean, like, I think we forget a lot of times at the end of the day, like, these are humans that that are out here doing all these tests, and they're going to have bad days. There's going to be days where, I mean, somebody like Chris Godwin, he tested really well. He had a really nice athletic profile. I didn't necessarily see that on tape. Like, another Penn Stater, Mike Gesicki, killed the combine. I didn't see him play as fast as he tested. So the thing that I like using the combine for is, like, if I kind of like to double check on some guys, like if somebody like runs a 40 that's a lot faster than how I thought they played, maybe double back and take another look and see if I'm missing on something. But the thing that's gonna, like, you're not gonna see too much from me in terms of rankings until the NFL draft, because it's gonna change so much from now to the combine to the draft. So kind of rambling here, but back to your original point, Kev, the wide receiver position is really deep this year. And not only that, but that you also have guys that fit the mold of playing at different positions too. Like, you have your guys like Devin Duvernay, who are going to be strictly slot guys. You have your outside guys. You have fast guys. You have guys like Tyler Johnson and Bryan Edwards, who are just really solid all around. Maybe their ceiling isn't as high as some other guys, but they have really safe floors. And as long as they have the draft capital, they're going to be safe prospects for you to take. So, I mean, it's probably stronger at the top of the draft for running backs, but in terms of depth, that wide receiver definitely takes that this year.
No, I totally agree. And before we, I guess, close it out, I didn't really get to say a lot on Bryan Edwards, but I honestly think that he's the next Chris Godwin. Like, I think that's who he is, and that's who I think his ceiling can be. So I'm pretty excited about Bryan Edwards myself, and I'm to see what he does at the next level. So it's gonna be fun to see where he winds up. I just hope it's not like the Raiders or something where I have to like hate Bryan Edwards, because that's great. Because I am a huge Chris Godwin fan, and I think I'm gonna buy a Chris Godwin jersey this offseason because I am in love with that man. He is a beast. So
I'm actually surprised to find out that you don't already have one.
I know, right? I should, but I just haven't gotten around to buying it yet. But I think I'm gonna make it happen this offseason. So, anyways, so again, I appreciate everybody tuning in. I appreciate everybody checking the show out. Check out the YouTube channel if you're not watching it on there. I think we're gonna try to actually break down a lot of this week and put this on YouTube into much smaller, actionable, digestible little segments. And if you're listening on podcast, please rate and review, subscribe to the podcast. It really helps us out. And subscribe on our YouTube channel. We're going to be doing a lot more smaller videos, the 3 to 5 minute type of videos on a lot of these guys, and kind of getting this stuff out. Again, appreciate Jesse Reeves coming on the podcast. He is an excellent just NFL prospect, Dynasty follow. So follow him on Twitter at Jesse Reeves FF. And next week, we have another guest coming on. We're going to be doing quarterbacks and tight ends together because I just don't think we want to go super deep. And I mean, how deep can you really go into the quarterback position And this isn't like an incredibly deep quarterback year anyway, but at most ever, there's 3 to 4 or 5 guys that you really want to talk about. The rest is just white noise. So we're going to put those two positions together next week. And who do we have on?
Zach Thomas from the Dynasty draft room. He's been doing a lot of awesome work and started off doing stuff just from a fantasy perspective, and now he's diving into. I mean, he's putting out an NFL draft guide, I think, with 200 prospects, and he's doing offensive linemen and cornerbacks and the whole bit. So he's someone I've gotten to talk to a couple of times, and I'm looking forward to that next week.
Yeah, it should be solid. So tune in next week, Tuesday night. We'll be going over the quarterbacks and the tight ends. And then I think right after that, I think is when the combine starts. So we'll get some more hard information. Shortly after that, we have free agency starting. We may do a pre-free agency show to kind of do a little rundown or something like that. We'll figure something out. But anyways, until next week, I really appreciate everybody tuning in again. And, have a great week. And we will see you next week. Peace.